Friday afternoon, Gold and Black Live. We're as ready as we're going to get for this show. Kyle Charters, Brian Newbert join me, as you can read. And guys, a lot going on in the world of Purdue basketball right now. Fascinating, I guess you'd call it fascinating, Brian, that last, I don't know if that's the right term, but the last 5 minutes of that game last night. They just concluded 10 minutes ago, but where are we with this basketball team?
You stole my joke about the game just ending 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Where are we with Purdue basketball right now? I have no idea. It seemed like, Purdue obviously won a game last night, but it felt like they walked off the floor in a very weird place because they won, but it seemed like they kind of felt like they lost, and the last 5 minutes of that game or so felt like something very, very strange. I don't really know how else to put it, but Purdue completely lost its mind there for the final couple minutes against Rutgers, and Rutgers really just ran out of time. I kind of felt like, they were down by 20 midway through the second half or whatever it was, got it down to 6 with 21 seconds to go, and, Purdue could not get that game over fast enough. And I just don't know what happened to Purdue there because they started making mistakes on offense. They started forcing shots they didn't need at the time, and then they started turning the ball over against that press, and it really made a game out of something that should not have been a game.
Yeah, 4 turnovers in the last 2 minutes, 17 points by Rutgers in a game that, and I know you watched it on TV. You had a different take, but I think being in the building made a difference because you just said, "Well, what?" And Larry Clisby on post-game radio said the same thing. What's the big worry?
Purdue fell asleep. I think Purdue fell asleep against a terrible team. Just fell asleep. It's 11 o'clock at night. You fall asleep. I mean, it was Rutgers just terrible. You don't want to see him do that, and I think it could turn out to be a positive because you can take some things away from it. It's good that they felt so terrible about the way they ended the game, but and the officiating is just awful.
It's
awful.
Come on,
really?
I mean, you couldn't get through a single possession without a whistle.
Took the whole game. Took it out of the whole game. Go ahead, Brian.
There are certainly some positive things here too. Obviously, Purdue played without a very important player in Vince Edwards. For the first time in months, really, its big men were sort of taken away by foul trouble. You haven't seen that since non-conference.
Yeah.
You haven't seen it with both guys, perhaps all season. So Purdue really had to fight through some things. What we've been talking about for the better part of the last 6 weeks is how Purdue just keeps finding ways to do things. Basil Smotherman steps up when Purdue needs somebody to step up. Purdue finally makes some jump shots when it absolutely needs to make some jump shots. So there are certainly some positive things here. And anytime you can win a game and be pissed off about it, I think that's probably there's some positive there.
Yeah, you basically played the first half without 2 of your starters because Hammond's played about 2 minutes total in the first half, and you didn't have Vince.
Total. Right.
And
then you were up by
output by him.
You're up by whatever 15 points or whatever you were up at the half. So, it was a good first half. Really, really terrible last 2 minutes.
Yeah,
unwatchable.
One of the things I think that I like about Hammonds is Purdue continues to try to get the ball into him, but he is making a post move to score every time he's got the basketball now, and I think that is. And I thought even like yesterday, he didn't score his 1,000th point to the 18:33 left in the second half. He didn't score in the first half. Of course, Kyle said he's played 2 minutes, but I was impressed that he had 13 at the end. He is scoring consistently and looking to do that. I know we've seen a complete change in him, but does that surprise you that he'd even beat it? It seems like he has really good offensive skills.
Well, I think what you're seeing now from A.J. Hammonds relative to what you saw in non-conference, you're just seeing a much more comfortable, much more decisive player. You remember in non-conference there were so many situations where it seemed like kind of paralysis by analysis. He'd get the ball around the rim, and he seemed like he would kind of overthink everything. When in reality, when you're that big and you're that close to the basket, there's really not a whole lot to think about. Just dunk the ball. And when you look at his percentages, it's unbelievable. He was a 45% shooter in non-conference play, and he's going to lead the Big Ten in field goal percentage this year, barring a meltdown here. He's shooting 62%, and his turnovers are way down too. And I think that kind of reflects a player who's just kept things simple. He's not overthought things, and he just seems much more comfortable with his surroundings and just more comfortable in terms of what kind of player he can be.
Okay, well, we've survived the first 5 minutes of the show. We're still alive. That's good. It's Survive in Advance month. But how this show works, if you're new to us, obviously there's a chat room there. You can send us in Covered Live questions, so we will try to answer them the best we can. We have 2 guests today. Kyle and Brian do not count as guests, neither does Stacy. However, we'll have Jerry Palm joining us in the second segment. We'll talk NCAA tournament scenarios. I know it's Kyle's favorite subject. He can get in the chat room and fire some questions that way. And then, of course, Pete Quinn will join us with Stacy at 2:40. We're going to talk about some of the comments Morgan Burke made yesterday about the university's give back of funds back to Purdue athletics and also Purdue tickets sales for football. We'll hit that in the third segment. And we want to also break down the mind-numbing scenarios that are already on the site regarding the Big Ten tournament, which really is an interesting deal. Any indication last night? I may have totally missed it. I'm sometimes the last to know, but with Edwards, any determined indication of how long this may go on?
No.
I know that we never know that, I guess.
As of last night, Matt Painter said he's still experiencing headaches, dizziness, that sort of stuff. They want that stuff to clear or they have to let that stuff clear before they test him for the concussion. He said in the press conference last night he was hopeful that Edwards could take that test this morning. I've not heard whether he has or not. I don't know if those results come in right away. Speaking briefly, informally with Edwards before the game yesterday, he said he had no idea how serious it was, but he is going to be livid if he can't play Ohio State. I will tell you, he will be not a pleasant person to be around.
Yeah.
If he's got to sit in street clothes at Ohio State.
Rick sent in a question that we just answered. Is the first time in the history of the show. Once Vince takes the concussion test, what is the protocol following? I don't.
Means he can practice.
Yeah.
He'll take the test and be able to practice. April Wilson had her second concussion of the year, and she missed 2 games, but it was only over a week span. So if I assume it was correct that Vince had the concussion on Monday, Sunday would be 6 days out, his first of the year. I would think, using that baseline, that he would be likely to be ready to go by Sunday. But every case is different, too.
When did they practice? So they practiced after Indiana Saturday, and they took 2 days off in those 3. So
yeah,
we
they
don't
took
know
2 of those first 3 days off.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know for sure when he.
Right.
We don't know that.
On TV, they said it was Monday. I don't know if that's accurate or
The
not.
thing about Vince Edwards, his loss last night, he's a much better offensive player than he is a defensive player. And Purdue scored 92 points yesterday without him. Obviously, it's against Rutgers. Obviously, there was some helter-skelter play there at the end. Obviously, it messes up Purdue's rotations a little bit. Obviously, it messed up their ability in some capacity to handle the press because he's such a valuable weapon against pressing teams.
I thought that was a big factor.
Because of his decision-making and his ball-handling ability. But obviously, Basil Smotherman was really good last night. And I didn't feel like Vince Edwards maybe hurt them as much as he ordinarily would have last night because of how Basil Smotherman played. Now, when the 2 big men get in foul trouble, that really jacked up Purdue's rotations because their third-string center would have been moving Edwards to the 5 or Basil Smotherman to the 5 and playing the other at the 4, in which case you would have played small, but you would have played big small. So if he can't play at Ohio State, I think you're really going to miss him from that capacity. But if Basil Smotherman plays like he did last night, Purdue's probably okay.
Maybe, but he really did play well.
I'm not saying you don't need him, you don't want him to play. I'm saying that for one game anyway, they were able to get by without him.
Yeah, no question. Go ahead. Did you have something else you want to throw into the fray? I'm looking at that from that standpoint. It really is going to be an interesting down the stretch. We'll kind of start to. I'll let you fire into this, Kyle, with respect to the Big Ten tournament scenarios. Obviously, Michigan State losing in a crazy finish last night, or at least giving up 5 points in 25 seconds. The last 25 seconds of that game, and losing at home to Minnesota makes a difference. But there's a virtual cornucopia of
well, I think
opportunities for Purdue.
If you were Purdue, you wanted Michigan State to lose. You also, though, wanted Indiana to beat Northwestern, I think, because you want to be involved in multi-team ties that include Indiana.
Yeah.
Because you've beaten Indiana twice. And it gives you a pretty big leg up on the tiebreaker. Because, as you might know, the tiebreakers work in the Big Ten tournament that if you're tied with multiple teams, it's your record against those other teams.
Yeah.
So if Indiana's included in that group, you're 2-0 against Indiana. It gives you a pretty good advantage against those other opponents, Ohio State, Michigan State, Iowa, those teams that might be in that group. It looks like Purdue will be somewhere between 3, well, they will almost, unless Wisconsin totally melts down. Will be between 3 and 6. 6 is pretty unlikely. I have to refer to my cheat sheet. The only way Purdue gets 6 is if they lose all 3 games, and if Iowa goes 3-0, and a couple other things have to happen there too. But reasonable things, as I kept putting them, but 6 seems like it probably will not happen. 5 is a possibility. There are several ways you could get to 5. If Michigan State goes 2-1, all this is impossible to just listen to and comprehend. But if Michigan State goes 2-1 and Ohio State goes 3-0, that would include a win against Wisconsin at home, then Purdue could drop to 5. There are also ways you can get to number 1.
Yeah, you can win the league.
It's possible.
You can win the league. That's an interesting thing if Purdue can take care of business. Big Ten championship is.
Here's how they win the league. Here's how they win it.
Has tough games left. That's the thing.
Well, here's how they win it. Purdue can win it going 2-1. Purdue goes 2-1. Maryland also goes 2-1, which is likely. I mean, you'd think that's pretty easy for them to do. They play Rutgers and
Penn State,
Michigan. Rutgers,
sorry.
Michigan at home, and on the road at Nebraska. And then Wisconsin would have to be 0-3. You'd have a 3-way tie for first at 13-5. So that's how they wouldn't be the number 1 seed. But
and for you old people, that happened once in 1979 when Purdue won a Big Ten championship with that same 13-5 record, and it took a half-court shot, I think, from a guy named Wes Matthews to deliver Purdue to a share of that. So it is
Trailblazers now, I think.
I could not find a scenario in which Purdue finished second.
Yeah.
But maybe if Maryland and Purdue both go 3-0 and Wisconsin goes 0-3, I guess Purdue would get the number 2.
Yeah.
They'd finish tied for first in the league and get the number 2 seed.
I wasn't listening. Can you repeat all that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's on the website. It's
a lot about
craziness.
nothing to some extent. But I think one thing is interesting. Most people, if you're a bookmaker, which none of us are, but Purdue will be an underdog in 2 of its 3 remaining games, expected to lose. Not that there will, but to Ohio State and Michigan State, Purdue can very easily be a double bye participant. In other words, get the double bye by even just winning 1 of 3 games. That still is relatively likely that they will still be in the top 4. Not maybe a 60% chance if you do the math with it.
And that game against the Ohio State-Wisconsin game could be critical to Purdue seeding too.
Yeah.
Because you would want Ohio State to drop. In some scenarios, you'd want Ohio State to drop into a tie with you.
Okay. All right. Enough about that, Brian. Anything else that you?
I guess there's kind of some split thought here in terms of if you're Purdue, how do you perceive how you want the rest of the Big Ten to do? Do you want it in the Big Ten tournament context or the NCAA tournament context? If I'm Purdue, I want Indiana to win every game from here on out. If I'm Purdue, I want Iowa to win every game the rest of the way because those are teams that can help the perception of your NCAA tournament resume. Maybe can help your RPI. Maybe can get some teams. I haven't crunched the numbers here. It potentially moves some people from one category to another in terms of good losses and bad losses. So, if I'm Purdue, I want everybody I've beaten this season to win from an NCAA tournament perspective, and I'm not as worried about the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, you want to finish tied with Indiana because I doubt anybody else in the league is 2-0 against Indiana.
Yeah, and then the other thing, which we'll probably get with Jerry Palm about, but it's interesting too, Brian, that you have a situation. Is it best for Purdue to, if you get the double bye and only win 1 more game, you're only at 20 wins. And is it better for Purdue to be a 5 seed and potentially play a Penn State, which wouldn't necessarily be a cakewalk, get a win in the Big Ten tournament and work your way in that way? That's another scenario that is something you can talk about, but whether it makes any difference, I don't know.
If I'm Purdue, I don't want anything to do with a potential bad loss to end the season. Yeah. So I want every bye possible.
That's a good point.
Because if you take the floor with Penn State, a team that should have beaten you in State College,
yeah,
I don't want anything to do with that.
And you could get beat by them.
If you suffer another bad loss, you could very well be done. Because Purdue's got almost as many bad losses as any other team on the bubble. I think they've got 3 right now. Now, that's subject to change. If Vanderbilt can beat some people, get into the top 100 in the RPI, they could conceivably move out of that bad loss column using the RPI top 100 as the measure. But you're still sitting right now on 3 bad losses. Kansas State has moved into the top 100, probably to stay. They're at 90 now. They'd have to completely go sideways to fall back out, but I don't want anything to do with the potential for another bad loss. You saw how scary last night was in those last couple minutes.
I just want Matt Painter to channel his inner Mike Davis and talk about how they're the 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament, and thus they should be in the NCAA tournament.
Well, what we keep coming back to at the NCAA tournament is this simple eyeball test. People have to understand conference standings do not matter because of unbalanced scheduling, and even if they did matter, and you want the tournament committee to take a really close look at your conference results, they're going to look at you and say, okay, you played the other three top teams, the other three top teams in the Big Ten once, and so you had an advantage. So that might even take a little bit of luster off Purdue's conference results. So Purdue just bottom line has to keep winning. Obviously, people think they're in right now. They're not in right now. They're 59th in the RPI. That stuff matters. They're behind a lot of other bubble teams. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts everywhere. A lot of conference tournaments to be played, a lot of games to be played by other bubble teams, but I really think Purdue would be best suited to win one of these road games, obviously.
Yeah.
Those other bubble teams, though, have bad losses, too.
Well, not as many as Purdue. There are 2 teams with 4 bad losses, Xavier and Miami, I believe.
And you say Purdue has
Purdue's
3.
got 3 right now, and there's one other team with 3. And there's a bunch of teams on the bubble with 1 or 2 or none. So if bad losses come back to hurt people, Purdue's not in a particularly good situation.
A lot of questions here, and on a question about Wednesday night's game at Michigan State. Is playing Michigan State as simple as putting Ray Davis on Valentine, Octius on Trice, and then making Dawson try to beat you with Hammonds there is to help any time? We haven't looked too much at that matchup yet, but
I think Purdue matches up okay with Michigan State. Obviously, Michigan State prior to last night was playing pretty well. It's a matter of keeping Brandon Dawson off the offensive glass, for one thing. It's a matter of covering their shooters, keeping them out of transition. I think John Octius will match up well on Travis Trice. You take him away, I think that really hurts their offense. I would be surprised if Purdue didn't do to Dawson a little bit what they kind of tried to do to Troy Williams in terms of try to make him take jump shots over you, try to keep him away from the basket.
Yeah.
Obviously, Purdue has that ultimate size at the rim Michigan State's not used to seeing. Michigan State just doesn't have the supreme talent they've had in years past in terms of a guy they can just give the ball to who can go score. And I think the way Purdue has been defending this season prior to last night, I think if they can recapture that level of defense, they can make it pretty hard on Michigan State. And if they keep them off the glass, keep them out of transition, they can fare well.
I'll stick with what I said a couple weeks ago. Ohio State's the game. That's the one. I think it's easier. I think it's easier to win at Ohio State. It is.
Well,
that team's like they're not as good as Michigan State either.
State
they have one guy.
Best player in the league.
They have the best guy. That's it though. One guy.
Yeah,
Slow him down.
Michigan State.
And he's hurt a little
Michigan State's
bit.
been beaten at home by Illinois and Minnesota and Maryland. I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that, but I think I was very impressed with Ohio State, the way they played Purdue the first, just the way they look, and maybe I was more enamored with that than
Purdue was up in that game by like 8 with a minute to go, weren't they?
Keep in mind too who Ohio State didn't have.
Yeah, Tate didn't play, right?
Mark Loving.
No, I mean Mark Loving didn't play. That's right, and so that's going to make a difference as well. All right, one other quick question: at this point in the season, is the Big Ten Coach of the Year between Matt Painter and Mark Turgeon? This is from Rick. Brian, you can weigh in.
That's a good starting point. Yeah, I think if Purdue closes the season strong, you're looking at Purdue was picked 13th in this league. They were in last place last year, and I think it would be hard to go with anyone other than Matt Painter. Mark Turgeon's done a great job too. I don't think anybody expected Maryland
they were picked 10th.
to be a top 10 team most of the year.
Yeah, picked 10th in the league. There's a lot of people coming in.
Yeah. So he's obviously done a really good job. I think Melo Trimble has a lot to do with that too. I don't know if people expected Melo Trimble to walk in and be one of the 2 or 3 best guards in the Big Ten. But I think right now it would be hard to give it to Bo Ryan, considering he brings back a Final Four team from last year. Tom Izzo, obviously. Prior to last night, maybe, was a guy you would have considered. For the first few weeks of the Big Ten season anyway, Tom Crean might have been a guy you talked about. I think he's fallen off. I don't think Fred McCaffrey or John Gross would factor in. So really what you're looking at is Matt Painter and Mark Turgeon.
Sound reasonable? Okay, we'll let you.
I just named every coach in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So you can add.
Hard to disagree.
Pat Chambers, probably not.
Yeah, though I like Pat Chambers.
Eddie Jordan, not so much.
Eddie Jordan's. He was yelling at the refs last night, and maybe he should have been. All right, Brian, this is one of your favorite questions. Who will transfer from the basketball team at the end of the season? Can you definitively say right now who's going to transfer?
Oh, I can't. I don't have any reason to think anybody will. I don't have any reason to think anybody won't. Obviously, people are going to talk about a certain guard who's not played as much this year as he would have liked. I don't know. I think the bigger question is what's A.J. Hammond's going to do.
Yeah.
I think that determines whether or not Purdue is potentially a top 25 team going into the next season. Obviously, the John Octius void is going to be significant, but if you bring back A.J. Hammonds, this team's got a lot of pieces in place if they can stabilize their backcourt, which is something we've said like 4 springs in a row now.
Yeah, it's a very similar situation, I think, from that standpoint that you have. I think that is the bigger story is what will A.J. Hammonds do and down the stretch.
Stacy wants me to point out one of my errors. She's watching, and she's solely watching for me to make mistakes.
Okay.
Well, Purdue can finish second pretty easily if Purdue wins out and Maryland loses a game.
And they'll finish it by themselves.
Yes,
yes, because they're tied right now at this point. It's funny. You used to be able to know this stuff like the back of your hand. But it seems to be confusing. I don't know if it's because it's jumped to 14 teams and you can't. I can't keep track anymore. I'm not sure. Brian, commented Dakota Mathias had a career high 11 points last night. And this is a comment from Boiler Ball. Would like to see more from Dakota Mathias. Why does he start and sit so much? I don't know if that was the case yesterday, but what's Coach Matt Painter's thought process?
I think people are underestimating Kendall Stephens to an extent. If I asked you who leads Purdue in plus minus for the season, who would you say? It's actually Kendall Stephens.
Yeah,
I think Kendall Stephens is Purdue's best entry passer.
Well, no, Octius is ahead.
Not as of last night.
Changed last night. Better check your thing, but yeah,
you better check yours.
Yeah.
I think Kendall Stephens is Purdue's best entry passer. I think he gives you a little bit better athlete out there.
Yeah.
And I think people still respect him even when he's not making shots. I think he has an impact on the game. When you look at some of the plays Purdue scored on at Indiana, they don't work if Indiana's not closely guarding Kendall Stephens the way they are. That inbound they ran from the sideline for Rayfeld Davis for that basket, that was so important. There's probably not space in the lane for Rayfeld Davis to get that bucket if Indiana's not following Kendall Stephens everywhere he goes. Has Dakota Mathias earned that respect yet? I don't know, but he was 1 for 6 at Indiana. I'm not sure Indiana would have been chasing him around the way they were chasing Kendall Stephens. I think Stephens too, with his length, and he's a little bit of a better athlete than Mathias. Although Mathias has come a long way defensively, I just think Kendall Stephens at this point still brings you a little bit more. He's more experienced too, and that certainly helps.
Yeah. Since we're correcting each other, Kendall would have had to been plus 60 last night.
Yeah, he's
to pass.
The Octius passed him the last, and that's up to prior to last night.
Well, that's assuming, we'll
and it is
we'll talk
correct.
about this later. The website I checked had Kendall Stephens #1.
Yeah, that's interesting. One last question on the whole.
That's Big Ten only?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about overall.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is true. The one that we run in our Express is Big Ten games only. That is correct, and that would be a difference. Let me see what other questions we have. How many basketball from Willis Price? This is one of our watchers in Atlanta who's watching. He should be working right now. How many basketball players at Purdue have come from Milwaukee? And it's not Willis Price is not the one. The
There's
answer,
a big one.
there's one. Carl Landry. No,
Carl Landry.
Carl Landry. A guy named Randy Shields way back in the day, and I'm not sure if there's anybody else that. But Carl Landry was a pretty good player from that standpoint in terms of and still playing in the NBA. So we got a lot of football questions as well. You look back at Bryson Scott, who is always a discussion point with things. How do you see his role for the rest of the season? I mean, he comes in yesterday and doesn't do a couple things from the get-go, and yet he still gets does certain things well. What do you see him doing down the stretch? I mean, is that
it's the same thing it's been for 2 years now. He's got the physical ability. It's just a matter of carrying out things and playing with some poise, playing with a cool head.
Yeah.
It was a great story that he was out there to seal the Indiana game, so to speak. But Purdue won despite him because he had some pretty significant breakdowns there that really could have cost Purdue. And Purdue was fortunate to overcome them. The entire game they'd been going over the screens on Yogi Ferrell. He comes in, goes under the screen. Yogi Ferrell makes the three that puts Indiana ahead. Obviously, there's the turnover where he gets called for the offensive foul. When you didn't need to attack the basket, you needed possession. You needed the court stabilized. You needed everybody in their positions, and your half-court offense set up, your defense set up at the other end. And I just thought, he still has those moments where he's a little bit out of control. I mean, he's aggressive. He's always going to be an aggressive player. We can't fault him for that, but the aggressiveness still what's always been his greatest strength remains his greatest weakness, and it's been a real process for him, and there doesn't appear to be an end in sight for that process right now.
I like his skills.
Oh, everybody likes it.
I
It's
just
hard not
wish,
to.
I
Yeah,
wish he would control it. I mean, he would have been great at the end of the game yesterday to get the ball up the court because he can
get it and go.
get it and go.
Yeah.
But he gets it and go, and you don't know where he's going.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
And that's what it's not a personal deal with Painter. It's not. People think it's his personal vendetta. They throw the word doghouse around. It's not. It's a practical basketball decision that it's really hard to look at and say, man, he's not treating that kid right. He should be playing him. No, watch him play. Watch the anecdotal evidence.
Yeah. I think you guys are in agreement on that, and certainly I feel the same way. Willis, by the way, you're right. Keith Stewart was the other one from 1989. Was on that. Is from Milwaukee as well. Only lasted a year. We're going to take a short break, and we are waiting for Jerry Palm to call us, and when he becomes free, he will do so. We'll take a 2-minute break though, and kick Kyle off, and Brian and I will sing and dance for 15 minutes if Jerry doesn't call. There's a lot of questions, so there are no issues there. We'll take a 2-minute break and be back for the second segment of Gold and Black Live.